Okay, now we're going to pull the bottom end off of this. Like I said, in the gear lube change, normally I would change the gear lube after I've pulled the bottom end off while it's on my rack, on my stand, but in this case we're doing it section by section. So I'll grab a wrench, 4 bolts. There's probably one under the skeg here. Take our trim tab off. Probably pull that propeller out of there too. Let's do that. As part of our regular service, just show you what I was doing there. We grease the propeller shaft splines. So this propeller's got a couple of locking tabs on here that I was just banging out of the way off of the lock nut, so I can take the propeller off. So tap them down a little bit further. Most of the times these locking tabs can be reused. Thrust washer is nice and tight. So that's 2 years of since I've greased it, and you can see it's a little bit crunchy there, but the propeller still slid off nice and easy. So always grease your propeller shaft splines. I like to do them every year. And that way if you have to change your prop in the water or whatever, it comes off. I have had propellers here that I've literally had to cut off. If you watch enough YouTube videos on this, you'll probably find some videos on stuck propellers. So we grease them every year. And there is a nut on a stud up under here. Right up, it was under the trim tab zinc. We'll take that one out of there first. And then we'll take these 4. Now the drive is, the gear control is currently in neutral. I can turn the propeller shaft. These ones are kind of tricky to put back on because of the stud here. So I'll show you how I identify that I'm in forward gear and can line up the splines and everything when we come to putting it back together here. Once you take your last bolt out, don't walk away from it and have it slide out accidentally. They're usually pretty snug, but this one's a little bit tight there. There we go. See a bit of corrosion popped out of there. It was tight on this forward guide pin there. So we'll just slide this off, and we'll take it over to, when you're sliding it off, watch you don't bang on your propeller or your drive shaft and bend it. You'd have to hit it pretty hard, I think, but you want to slide it straight out, taking the weight, and we'll go and put it over on the bench. So here's our water pump housing. Take the camera off for a moment. We'll have a bit of a look at it. Let me grab the monitor here so I can see what I'm showing you guys. There we go. So our water pump housing, these 4 bolts here hold it on. The impeller is inside. One thing of importance is the drive shaft splines at the very top here. We want to grease them every year. This has been 2 years, and we can see that the grease is getting pretty hard and grungy. So they get greased every year. And right now we're going to pull this housing off. I'm going to blow all the dust and everything out of there. This is our gear selector, gear shift lever. It turns to select forward and reverse. Currently in neutral because we can spin the propeller shaft. We'll have a look at that in a little bit when it's all going back together. So let me get the air turned on here, and we'll blow that off. Okay, now that the compressor's stopped, let's wind this up a bit higher. You'll probably be able to see a bit better. I have over the years had a lot of people ask why I don't use impact guns all the time, and this bolt right here is exactly why. It's very tight. If I hit that, it's got corrosion down in the threads. You can see all this corrosion build up here. It's corroded down in the threads. If I hit that with an impact gun to take it out of there, I would have broken the head off of it for sure. It just hits it too hard and snaps them every time. This one's a little tight as well. Oftentimes I'll have the little gun, and once I know that the threads are clean and I'm not going to break anything, I'll whip them out quickly. But for now, it's been my experience that doing it by hand, I break a whole lot less bolts. The number of people I see using easy outs and things like that, generally I only break a bolt if I intend to. It never happens by accident. There are some you can't get out that are just too corroded in there. If I couldn't get that out, if this bolt wasn't going to turn, I would have hit it with a hammer and punch straight on top to shock it, and then I would have gotten the torch onto it and gotten it really hot with a little propane torch, and that breaks down the oxidation, and then I can generally get them out. So let's see what this water pump impeller looks like. So the key is there. I see them drop out when amateurs are doing this quite often. And there's our water pump impeller in the housing, in its position. This is really great. So this will help you guys understand how a water pump impeller works. Sits in here there, turns this way. You can see that by the way the vanes are folded over. And you can see that on this side here, this space is smaller than that space because the shaft through the middle is offset in this round housing. So the water pickup is here in the bottom. That's our water pickup. So this goes on there like that. And then this is our outlet. So the water comes in here in this large space and gets squeezed out here. It gets pulled around here. So if you follow one space as it comes around, right here it's really small and it's pushing the water out this outlet through these through this slots in the housing on the side there. And then as this space moves around, it gets bigger and bigger until it gets to this slot here. As it's getting bigger, it builds up a vacuum here to suck the water in there. When it's full of water here, the vane comes around and closes this slot off about here, and then it starts to squeeze. The space gets smaller until it opens up this slot here, and then it pushes the water out there because this space is smaller. So this is what's really important people don't understand about their water pump impellers, is when you start to lose the spring, when the vanes are all laid over like this, they don't have as much spring back to them, so they don't spring out and form a vacuum in here to suck the water up through there. So it'll reduce the amount of water flow that you get through your engine for cooling. So I see a lot of guys get 5, 6, 7 years out of their water pump impellers, but we replace them. Generally, as a rule, we replace a water pump impeller every 2 years. We inspect them every year. This one's been 2 years since I've done it. You can see it's not worn at all. It's got a few little fold marks in there, but even that's not bad. And it's laid over a little bit. Now this boat gets used all year round, so it hasn't sat in one spot. You know, if you were on a really tight budget, this one's soft. You could squeeze this for another year, but the boat's here for a full service. We're going to put a water pump impeller in it. It's got, that's our key there. And then they also have, not all of them have this. Oh, this is interesting. There's 2 down there. Little nylon seals, top and bottom. Not all water pumps have this, but if you have them, you want to put them there. In particular, for the bottom, the key tends to run on the housing. Because of the weight of the key, it floats in there, and it'll cut a groove in your lower housing. So we're doing our water pump impeller here. We're gonna replace this one because it's 2 years old, as we talked about before. I got a new one here. We're using Sierra part numbers. Sierra is an aftermarket marine product supplier. We use an awful lot of their products. And other than one fuel filter, we've never had any issues to speak of with their products. Their quality control seems to be good, and for most standard applications, they're just great. They're very cost effective. We're going to replace the water pump gasket as well. So we got a new one of them there. So we'll just clean everything up. Now, one of the things you want to look for, if you're in an area where you've got a lot of sand, you're running your boat up on the sandy beaches, shallow bottoms, that sort of stuff. If you're running a lot of sand through your boat, you want to check for through your motor, you need to check for wear on your wear plates. And and inside your housing. This one is great. There's a couple of little marks in there, but we don't have any sand here. Our beach is, it's all fjords, it's all deep here. Very deep. So sandy beaches are not an issue for us. Just going to clean the old gasket off here. The other thing I'm going to do, because I had that real tight bolt on the other side here, so I'm just going to run a tap down those holes there to clean the threads out a bit, get the corrosion out. And I'll clean the bit of gasket off of there too. A little wire brush cleans that up pretty nice there too. Gets rid of that last little bit of corrosion and stuff. And let me go get a tap. That would be a 6 mil. Clean these bolts up. So we got a new gasket here. And the impeller is there. I was just comparing how soft it was after 2 years. A little dab of grease. This is a silicone grease. This is a easy slide for brakes, but it's synthetic, so it's good for rubber. Little dab of grease to hold the key in place. These keys have, zoom in a bit. They have one end's a little rounded over and one end's a little more sharp. I put the rounded over end up so that it's easier to slide into the impeller. It's not important really, but it's just what I do. A little bit of synthetic grease on the base plate there. I also grease the gasket. Got our bottom wear ring is on there. So the keyway goes there. I generally hold on to the fin that's pointing at the keyway because once it goes on there I forget where it is. Oops. Now you want to hold your shaft and try and turn your impeller. Make sure the key is in place. It's very easy when you're doing this, especially if it's turned around that way, to push this down and drop the keyway down into your pickup tube there. The number of times I've had people bring me their lower units that they've put a new impeller in themselves and there's no key in there anymore. Because it fell out. A little bit of grease in the housing. Drive shaft turns clockwise, looking down on the top of it. They all do. That I'm aware of anyway. Some oddball might have turned backwards, but I have yet to find one. So you can see which way I'm turning the housing here, and then I'm also turning the drive shaft. And that lays all the fins over on the impeller the right direction, making sure my gasket's in the right place. Today I'm using Lucas marine grease. My Quicksilver grease is no longer available. Their factory burnt down or something like that. Oops, that was close, Jim. Sealing ring for the top. We'll put this back on again. Grease my threads up really well. Now this is, just as so you know, this is a freshwater boat. This is in one of our local lakes, and those threads were still corroded up. Lots of grease on your threads if you want to take it apart again. It's funny, I get lots of inquiries from people because of the videos asking for help about this, that, or the other. Well, if you've been watching my videos, you want to put lots of grease on there. So I'm just running these down finger tight. Turn my shaft to make sure that the impeller's in there, not pinched. And then what we check is just down here. I check the gap around the shaft to make sure that the housing is centered, so you can see how it moves there. So I make sure that I'm centered in the hole all the way around that housing before I tighten my 4 bolts. Turn it again. There we go. Now we're going to go up to the top here. So, drive shaft splines. I like to clean the old grease off as much as possible. No sense having dirty old grease in there. And some fresh grease on there. I make sure every spline has got grease on it, because that's the whole point, is to protect the splines. No grease on top. When it goes up into the end of your crankshaft, that's a bottomed hole. If you fill it up with grease, like if you end up with a blob of grease up there, it'll actually hydraulic and you won't be able to get the drive all the way up. If you pull it up with the bolts, you're putting an upload, a vertical load on the thrust bearings in the engine. It's all bad. So no grease on top. Just cleaning my mating surfaces here. Change the gear loop. So I got a couple of alignment dowels here. I put a bit of grease on them. Again, around the outside, not on top, because those holes have bottoms as well, and if you fill them up with grease, you're going to have a hydraulic lock. You won't be able to get it all the way up, and these are a snug fit, so you won't be pushing the grease out. I usually give this a little gentle wipe with some grease as well to help guide the water pickup on there. And that's it for our water pump impeller. Now we go back to the motor. Actually, we're going to walk around a little bit here first. So, because this lower, let me grab my monitor here. Let's see what the camera's looking at. Okay. Because these lower units on these Mercs have this dowel, when you're putting your lower unit up into here, you can't rotate it to line up the splines on the drive shaft. So to do that, I put it in forward gear and turn the prop shaft. So now to do that, we need to have the shifter in forward gear. So that's our shift rod that comes down. Can you see that there? There it is. That's our shift rod there. It comes down and it rotates left and right for forward and reverse. Now here's something interesting. I found that some turn one way and some turn the other. So what I do, currently the motor is in neutral. I know that because that's where I left it. So I put a mark straight up and down on there in neutral. Then I go around and put it into forward. And I see that the mark has turned this way. So looking at the top of the drive, counterclockwise. Okay, so now we're on our drive. This is our that's a guide to guide that shift rod onto the splines. This is a connector. And then counterclockwise, we need to turn this to put it into gear. So that's locked it into gear. Grab this, and I can see that as I turn the drive shaft the right way, I can see that the prop shaft is turning the correct way. So that confirms that I'm in forward gear. So we'll put all this back together. Okay, so before we put our drive back on, grease our bolts. More grease. Trust me, you'll thank me next year. And I put a little bit of grease on the splines of the shifter as well. And grease the stud. Stud into the hole. Where's that drive shift? So the shift shaft on these tends to fall out of alignment a little bit. We're good there. And then, because we're both in forward gear on the control and in the lower unit, I can now turn the propeller and that lines up my splines, just like that. I'm going to slide back down just a little bit to make sure that I got the shift shaft in there properly. And I do, I can see that, and I can also see that my water pickup is on there. And now I've slid all the way up. It's a little tight on that front dowel. Don't pull it up on your bolts. Make sure you can slide it all the way up by hand. Otherwise, if you have to pull it up with your bolts, something's in the way. The most common one is your shift shaft, and I've seen cases where people use the bolts to pull the lower unit up and push that shift shaft all the way up and into the oil pan of the motor, or the crankcase of the motor. Which is really messy. So always push it up by hand first. And there you have it. One water pump job. Going to, what are we going to do here? We are going to put the propeller back on, clean the splines. Well, actually, what we're going to do is just confirm that our shift still works. So that's in forward gear. Now let's put the propeller on first. So, because of the way the dogs work, the gear selector in the bottom here, they're on kind of a ratchet, so you can turn the propeller forward but not backwards. And that tells me we're in forward gear. Put the selector into neutral, and the propeller will spin freely. Into reverse. And the propeller locks up. There's no ratchet on the reverse dogs, only on the forward dogs, so you can't turn it either way. So we'll put that back into neutral. There we go. Prop nut back on. Make sure your locking tab is in good shape. If not, you can replace that. They are available. Propellers don't have to be super tight. This one uses a nylon lock nut as well as locking tabs to hold to keep it on. So it does not have to be super tight. If we have a look here, you can see that my flats are lined up with the locking tabs. If I put another 1/6 of a turn to get around to the next flats, it's going to be super, super tight, and it just doesn't need to be that tight. So tight, but not super tight. Squeeze our locking tabs up. And there you have it. Put my trim tab back on. again, we're going to grease the bolt. And that's that part. So we've changed our gear lube, we've changed our water pump impeller, we've greased our drive shaft splines. Next part of the service, we're going to change the engine oil.